If we haven't met, my name's Allie. Welcome if you're here with us or joining us online. Pete Scazzaro once said, "We find God's will for our lives in our limitations." I'm not sure I like that. We may have heard we find God's will in our passions or our skills, or definitely in the church, you've probably heard we find God's will for our lives in our spiritual gifts. But I don't know about limitations. I think what Scazzaro was pointing to is that when we honor our limits, we are led into a deeper communion with and dependence on God. It also leads us to honor the limits and vulnerabilities of others, which is an act of love. But the reality is, friends, we live in a world that urges us to live beyond our limits and ultimately push past God's will for us. Last year, a well-known speaker, author, and researcher in the area of shame and vulnerability, Brené Brown did a podcast series on living beyond our limits. In the opening episode of the series, she explains the story behind why she felt compelled to do this series. She says that one day she's at her hair salon getting her hair highlighted. She's sitting underneath the heaters full of foils in her hair when she's trying not to waste any time. She's has her laptop open, she's working, has her phone pushed against her ear, smashing the foils. And she looks up and says, "Y'all have a printer I can use?" Then she realizes a guy staring at her, and he looks at her and he says, "Wow, you really look like you've been shot out of a cannon." Annoyed, she just looked at him and glared, and he said, "No, really, I've been watching you, and you look really stressed out and really busy. It seems like you have a human scale problem." She was agitated, but also curious. So she closed her laptop, put down her phone, and she said, "Okay, what do you mean?" And the man says, "Well, I'm a private pilot, and when you first learn to fly, you're in those little two-seater planes. If it's cold outside, it's cold in there. If it's hot outside, it's hot in there. If you go left, your whole body goes left. Right, your whole body has to go right. If there's a gust of wind, you feel it underneath the plane. And when you're descending, you're a little disoriented because you're just at human scale. But then it becomes not enough. You want something bigger, faster. You want to go higher. So now you're in a jet. But if you stay present, you die. You actually have to live 60 to 90 seconds ahead of the moment because you're going so fast, so hard, and so high." Then he says, "It's controlled flight into terrain." And Brené said, "What is that?" He said, "It's an aviation term for when a pilot crashes but thought they were in control the entire time. Controlled flight into terrain. The flight was really never in control." The man had gotten her attention, and Brené could not stop thinking about the cost of living beyond human scale, beyond how we were emotionally, physically, cognitively, and spiritually wired to live. One person she wasn't able to sit down with for that series was Jesus. So today I want us to look at the life of the most spiritually and emotionally mature human that ever walked this earth and learn from how he lived at human scale by honoring his human limitations. If you're joining us for the first time, we're in a sermon series called The Forgotten Rhythms of Jesus, and we're looking at the rhythms of Jesus' life that sustained him in his humanity and ministry here on earth. Today I want to look at the rhythm that Jesus modeled exceptionally, but if I'm honest, is really, really hard for me. And I'm guessing it may be hard for you as well. It's the rhythm of honoring our limits. If you have your Bibles, we're going to begin in the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verse 1. We're also going to look at some other passages in John and in Matthew. And I think we're going to learn how Jesus' rhythm of honoring his limits will actually guide us in honoring our own. The greatest example of Jesus embracing limitations is by becoming human. Through the incarnation, he limited himself as the creator of the universe. He came close to dwell with us, to know us, to relate to us, and to rescue us, and to show us how we honor our humanity. In John chapter 1, verse 1, we read, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind." And then down at verse 14, we read, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us." The creator of the cosmos, of you and of me, put on human flesh to dwell with us. God put skin on to get as close to us as possible, to intimately know every human experience. If you're like me, maybe you've wondered why. Why did he have to do that? Was it actually necessary for God to become human through Jesus in order to save us? Well, Hebrews tells us, since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by the fear of death. Whether or not Jesus had to, he chose to. He chose to share in our humanity to destroy the final limitation that most of us fear the most, which is death. He came to show us what lies beyond that limitation, which is resurrection. Although his mission was to end sin and death, he also modeled how to honor human limits physically, emotionally, and spiritually. But in our current society, we know we are often compelled to resist or completely ignore our human limits. History has actually shown this has always been the case for us. One of the greatest inventions has also led to us pushing our limits to the extreme. It's both a blessing why we're able to gather in this room today, but it's also led to a great imbalance in our rhythms of rest and activity. Joan Chittister wrote, "With the invention of the light bulb, balance became a myth. Now human beings could extend the day and deny the night. Now human beings could break the natural rhythms of work and rest and sleep. Now human beings could begin to destroy the framework of life and turn it into one eternal day with, ironically, no time for family, no time for reading, no time for prayer, no time for privacy, no time for silence, no time for time." Now, Joan wrote this in 1990. I wonder what she would have to say to us today about the smartphone, social media, or my favorite, Netflix. I've witnessed firsthand over this past year our resistance to honoring our physical limits. So a year ago in January, I started a new fitness routine through spin classes at a local studio. One of my much younger, more fit colleagues here invited me to try a class. Immediately, I was hooked. It's actually really more of a love-hate relationship because I do love it. I also don't like being trapped in a very hot, smelly room with a bunch of sweaty strangers. But the beginning of each class, regardless of the instructor, or if you're new, if you've been taking it for a long time, there are very clear safety guidelines. And one of those guidelines is if you're going too fast, if your heart rate gets too high, you're breathing too labored, if you've injured yourself, you feel out of control, you're instructed to utilize this big, bright button in the middle of the bike, the stop button. Hopefully you never have to use it because you're listening to your body and you're going at the pace that allows margin for recovery. But if you feel out of control at any point, you're supposed to utilize this button. Interestingly, in 1 year of taking these classes at least once a week, I have never once seen somebody push the button. I've seen people pass out. I've seen people run out. I've seen people toss their breakfast, but no one will push the button. And I think that's because we don't want to acknowledge we have limits until it's too late. And we definitely don't want to acknowledge our limits in front of others. But the reality is our refusal to honor limits will eventually lead us to an abrupt stop. But often it looks like illness, either physical or mental, a relational breakdown, increase in numbing or escaping behaviors in our life, or even a loss of faith. You can maybe feel the inhuman pace of life, but you don't know where to begin. Well, if we look to Jesus, we see something so radically different in his rhythm. Japanese theologian Kazuki Koyama describes the pace of Jesus as 3 miles per hour. Rarely do we see a scene of Jesus running or rushed. He said yes and no with confidence, without the fear of disappointing people. He started his day in solitude and always surrendered to the Father. We don't see him frustrated or annoyed or distracted by those coming to seek him. He knew who he was, what he was called to, where he was going, and with limits to honor on that way. In our time together, I want to look at 2 limits among many that Jesus honored in his humanity. The first one is his limits around activity. Jesus' time was limited. He only lived 33 short years, and only 3 of those were in active ministry. And he knew his activity would eventually lead to the cross, so time was precious. Every yes and every no had to be intentional. And we see Jesus honored limits around activity by being intentional with his time instead of reactive. Not everything is a crisis. He was free. He was free of fear of what others thought, saying yes to please. He resisted that. And then he had an eternal perspective. They wanted him to become famous, to conquer Rome, to multiply bread, to build an earthly platform and kingdom. But Jesus had an eternal perspective in mind that informed his activity. One story in the Gospel of John, chapter 7, we see Jesus embodying this limits around activity. And we read, after this, Jesus went around in Galilee. He did not want to go about in Judea because the Jewish leaders there were looking for a way to kill him. So in this moment, Jesus had just experienced a mass exodus and he was green-lighted, which is street slang for there was a hit out on him. So what happened was he had fed the 5,000 and then just the number of followers increased because people wanted bread to consume without much effort on their part. So Jesus had to stop, turn to them and teach them, do not work for bread that spoils. I am the living bread. Unless you eat my flesh and you drink my blood, you cannot live. And naturally that caused a commotion and people dispersed. So that is the context of what's happening here. And verse 2, but when the Jewish festival of tabernacles was near, Jesus' brother said to him, leave Galilee and go to Judea so that your disciples there may see the works you do. No one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. Since you are doing these things, show yourself to the world, for even his own brothers did not believe in him. His brothers had the opposite mindset. You better get active. Show as many people as possible your power. Everyone's going to be there. You better leave now to get there on time. Which Jesus responded to them, my time is not yet here. For you, any time will do. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me, and because I testify that its works are evil. You go to the festival. I'm not going to this festival because my time is not yet fully come. After he had said this, he stayed in Galilee. His brothers didn't understand that although he came to save the world, he did not come to entertain the world. He came to intentionally point people to the Father, not build a platform. And by honoring his limits around activity, he had more time to look people in the eye and offer forgiveness, more time to teach his disciples, more time to rest, more time to commune with the Father, more time before his time was up. We actually see a similar commitment in the life of Martin Luther King Jr. Just like Jesus, every activity and movement could have been his last. King was a gifted preacher, was kind of pushed into a leadership position during the Montgomery bus boycott. And he wanted to be faithful to his leading, so he's intentional in all of his activity, but the pressure was mounting on him personally and in his safety as well, including that of his family. So one night after his first jail stint, he's sitting at a table in his kitchen, hot cup of coffee in hand while his wife and daughter sleep. And he just waits to hear from the voice that will give him the courage to continue on. And eventually he heard a voice say, Martin Luther, stand up for righteousness, stand up for justice, stand up for truth. That was the activity he was called to and nothing else. Some claim this to be the most important night in King's life. Another man who was so intentional with his activity and time, who was committed to similar work to King, but lived 100 years earlier, was actually Abraham Lincoln. Historians say that there was a cottage nearby outside of DC that was a home for retired vets that often Lincoln would escape to in the night, and he wouldn't tell anyone. He would ride on horseback and he wouldn't let people know so that they could protect him, which was part of being president. But he would go and just spend time in solitude and in prayer and in thought. And the most critical time in American history as the Civil War raged on, he intentionally arranged his activity as there was crisis and commotion in the White House. He got away to reflect and to determine what would be next. And some say this intentional stillness impacted the trajectory of American history. Cal Newport wrote, solitude helped save the nation. Ultimately, Jesus went up to the festival because his Father had work for him to do there. After his brothers had left for the festival, he went also, not publicly, but in secret. Jesus' activity wasn't based on human pressure, fear of missing out, or trying to build a following. But in our modern context, friends, I know we often schedule activities and not honor our limits because of the pressure to do it all now, and never miss an opportunity. Maybe some of you are familiar with this story. This has been my life. Your son is 6, he hits his first Little League home run, and in that moment, you are certain he's gonna play for the Dodgers. So at the mature age of 7, he's on the top travel ball team. He has hitting and pitching lessons 3 days a week, and you take out a personal loan to fund the entire endeavor. But that's fine, because he's gonna put a full ride scholarship to USC, and you're gonna get a total return on your investment. But then you have a daughter, and then you have another son, and you wanna give equal opportunity to each of them. And so the anxiety around activity books our days, eradicates family dinners, and you never actually have a day of rest. Many of us let the anxiety of fairness and opportunity completely deny our limits. But Jesus honored limits by resting. He literally could fall asleep anywhere. Is anybody like that here? Well, you're probably sleeping. So, all right, good. One of you's not. So Jesus is heading to the other side of the lake, the Gentile region of the Gadarenes, to deliver a man from oppression. In Matthew 8, we read, he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came upon the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. So Jesus is sound asleep. In the midst of a storm that is a clear threat to the boat and the people inside, Jesus is non-anxiously sleeping. How is he so calm? If my child steps 1 foot on the ground out of her bed across the house, I am awake. I believe this is because Jesus held both his human limitations, his need to rest, and the confidence of the Creator who commanded the wind and the waves, all in himself. He replied, "You have little faith. Why are you so afraid?" And then he got up, rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. Most of us live in the midst of frantic activity, unable to rest because either we're in or we're bracing for a storm that we think Jesus may carelessly sleep through. We fill our time by overworking, overcommitting, overscheduling, finding ourselves bailing water out of the boat while Jesus just waits there for us to turn to him. That same man who awoke, quieted the wind and the waves, is the same one who has complete authority and control over your life right now in this moment. And he probably just wants to invite you to rest. So not only do we see Jesus consistently honor his limits around activity, we also see him intentionally honor limits of access. Who had access to the deepest parts of his life? Although Jesus was often surrounded by the multitudes, by large crowds of thousands, teaching to them and feeding them, he also intentionally selected smaller circles for the deepest truths of life and ministry. He chose 12 to spend most of his time with and to teach. And then he chose a smaller circle of 3 intimate friends who would be present for some of the most significant moments of Jesus' life. One of those intimate moments was on the Mount of Transfiguration in Matthew 17. We read, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. It was an incredible moment, a moment that Jesus needed because they stood there and the men watched in awe and terrified. Peter wanted to build a shelter and stay there forever. It was so glorious. But Jesus needed that moment to hear the Father's voice saying, "This is my Son whom I love. I'm pleased with you. Listen to him." Jesus needed to commune with heaven, with Elijah and Moses, and just to talk about the things that we will never know. So Peter is watching and they're falling down on their faces, and it was just an incredible moment. They're not able to stay. They need to head back down to complete the work Jesus had. And we read, as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Now, I wonder if this occurred today, Peter would have had to resist the urge to break out his iPhone and get a selfie on top of that mountain, or to secretly capture Elijah, Jesus, and Moses talking. I think Jesus would have instructed, instead of "don't tell anyone," he probably would have had to say, "Don't post this anywhere." Another example of limiting access to precious moments was in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus was in such deep distress. On his way to his final destination, he only allows those 3 same men to see his suffering. In Matthew 26, we read, then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, which are James and John, along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Friends, not everything in our lives is meant to be shared with the masses. A primary way we learn to honor our limits is to limit what we grant others access to. Moments for two, like engagements and finding out you're expecting and welcoming a child into the world, it's often shared beyond that intimate space. It changes how we are present in those moments. Moments for the family, like a child nervously performing a musical piece or opening a gift or asking mom a curious question, can be consumed for entertainment. And I know it's because we are wired for love and connection and affirmation, but we will settle for likes and comments. If you ask junior high or even elementary students now what they want to be when they grow up, there's a whole new vocation that you will often hear: social media influencer. Although there are incredible spaces to share creativity and skills on those platforms, there really are, many actually make a living doing that by granting access to every intimate moment of their lives for us to consume. In his book, Platforms to Pillars, Mark Sayers describes our culture of a platform society that has a deep allure but comes with a significant cost. He writes, the platform society offers us godlike elevation and visibility, yet our lived reality is human weakness. The more we attempt to build a platform, the more powerless we can find ourselves in a chaotic and changing world. Platforms offer us great visibility, but also make us more vulnerable. Andy Crouch is another man that has written extensively on technology, and he reminds us that the deepest human longing is to be seen and loved. But it's also created the perfect storm for technology, specifically social media. In his book, The Life We're Looking For, he opens with a reminder that when we're born, we learn love through facial recognition. Feeling seen and loved by our mother or a primary caregiver as they provided undivided attention and attunement. But now facial recognition has an entirely different meaning and purpose. Our face is most often recognized to open a world of escape or mindless activity and access to unlimited information our souls were never meant to carry. We were never meant to see the local and global suffering at the rate that we consume. Because as humans, we're made to lament. We're made to process in community. Our hearts can't bear it. And it was intentionally designed this way. Founding Facebook president Sean Parker gives a telling admission in a 2017 interview. He says, the thought process that went into building these applications, Facebook being the first of them, was all about how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? And that means we need to give you sort of a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post. Interestingly, the like button was a late addition to Facebook because they wanted people to stay engaged longer without having to make the commitment to actually comment on a post. They wanted you to consume more content with less commitment. Similarly, the Instagram story feature was also added because it called for less effort and more consumption, also keeping people engaged longer and checking more frequently. Back to the podcast series that Brené Brown did, one of the guests she had on was well-known psychotherapist and relationship expert Esther Perel. The goal was to discuss the advancement of AI and potential threats to our well-being and humanity. But Esther candidly told Brené, I don't think the biggest threat of AI is what we think it is. She said, the biggest threat and danger, I think, is artificial intimacy. And she made the joke, we may have 1,000 followers, but no one to feed our cat when we go out of town. Nothing about Jesus was artificial. His intimacy with others was so deep and so real. And as human beings created in God's image, we are made to live with limits that guard our hearts, our minds, our souls, and our bodies. Because we're more fragile than we'd like to admit. We're more limited than we want to acknowledge, and that's okay. We're also filled with the same power that raised Jesus from the grave. And one of the ways that we honor that spirit and their movements within us is how we honor our humanity. So Jesus showed us how to honor our limits around our activity, living with intention and freedom of what others think, and with eternity in mind. He also showed us that so much of our lives are meant to have limited access to others, and in that we honor the sacredness of our humanity and our stories. During his final meal with those he allowed access to, Jesus invited those to gather around him to remember that we were limited to save ourselves by working harder, becoming better, doing good. Ultimately, Jesus needed to be the one to take those limits on in his body for us through his sacrifice, destroying that final limitation, death. And as we take communion together, friends, as an act of remembrance, I just want to invite you to take a moment to consider the elements of Jesus' body. That he chose to come fully human, to limit himself, to know our limits. And acknowledging our powerlessness to save ourselves, but the faithfulness of Jesus to rescue us, we can remember that limits are a gift. And in them, like Scazzaro says, we find God's will for our lives. And his will is that all people join us at this table. Let me pray before we take communion. God, I thank you that you put skin on to dwell with us. Thank you that we don't have to fight and work and earn our way to you. That we don't have to strive and to strain and to stress to pave our path to acceptance or success. Thank you that you have your hand on our children. Thank you that you desire goodness to us. Help my friends here know eternal rest in you. God, help us to become those who walk at 3 miles per hour so we can be present in the world that desperately needs you. The Lord Jesus, on the night that he was betrayed, he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it, and he said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me." Friends, when we do this together, we are proclaiming the Lord's death, that he's conquered that final limitation, and he will come again to be raised with all of us. I would love to pray a blessing over you. Before I do that, if you need prayer, there's going to be a team at the front online as well. And then whenever we take communion together, we do take a benevolent offering that just provides support to those in our church and community who are experiencing financial hardship. So let me pray over you. Now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he turn his face of love towards you and give you peace and rest. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.